Welcome to the Designing Hollywood podcast in association with the John Campea Show. I am your host, Robert Meyer Burnett. This episode is sponsored by Paris Costumes International. Today's guest is an American film and television producer, screenwriter, and director. Most recently, he is known as the executive producer of both HBO television series Entourage and Ballers. He grew up in Nassau County, New York, and went on to study fashion and film at the Parsons School of Design. In 1993, he directed, wrote, and executive produced his debut feature film, Amongst Friends, which went to the Sundance Film Festival. In 2004, he teamed up with his old schoolmate, filmmaker Doug Ellin, who had an idea for a TV show loosely based on the life of Mark Wahlberg. The resulting series Entourage aired 96 episodes and led to a feature film. He was also a writer and executive producer for the series How to Make It in America. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome writer, director, executive producer Rob Weiss to the Designing Hollywood Show. Rob, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Robert. I really like. I gotta say, I really like your voice, man.
Oh,
it was very soothing.
Oh, well, thank you, sir.
Nobody's ever spoken about me in such a soothing manner before. But
I feel a little bit of a kinship to you in the sense that I too made an independent film in the 90s about my own life that was around the same budget level, and I saw Amongst Friends. I don't think I saw it in the theater, but I saw it on video because at the time, in the early 90s, 93, when Amongst Friends came out, there was obviously Steven Soderbergh had become the indie darling doing Sex, Lies, and Videotape at Sundance. Your film had gone to Sundance. Tarantino had made Reservoir Dogs the year before. You had Kevin Smith doing things, and there was a real explosion of indie cinema, and Amongst Friends was one of those movies.
Right.
And I've always wanted to hear the story. How did you get Amongst Friends made?
It's a pretty wild tale, you know, and I think it was the first real indication to me that there are powers in the universe that can conspire to realize a vision that would make absolutely zero sense, you know, logically to come together. But, you know, but we were the original, that period was this kind of indie movement that was different, obviously, from the, 70s young filmmakers. But it was pretty much led by Soderbergh and Sex, Lies, and then Quentin the year before me, Everything He Said. I think for me, I was seeing that other young filmmakers were out there doing it. John Singleton, I had read about making Boys in the Hood. Matty Rich was making Straight Outta Brooklyn.
Yeah.
At the same time, I was shooting Amongst Friends, and I saw that he was doing it on a shoestring budget, money they had raised through, a church group. And I was like, I was in a very interesting place in my life where most of my friends from high school had gone off to college, were now graduating, going out into the world, establishing careers that they had, studied for. And I was still kind of meandering at 22 and not sure what I was going to do. So I felt desperate to kind of catch up in this race, right, of life. And I think that was the real spark that fueled me to sit down and write it. And then once it was written, it just became a matter of, money.
Right.
And we really just started out. You had quoted before like 900,000. We started out with like 40 grand. And like we ran out of money, and then a friend would be like, "Oh, I'll loan you 10." And then John Pearson had seen footage that we shot with the roughly $50,000 that we had at that time invested, and he gave us the remaining 300. I believe it was 300 to finish it. So the movie was actually made for $300,000. What the reason? On paper, it'll say it was a $900,000 budget. Is like, I was crazy. I didn't think anything was going to happen with the movie. So I would go into like bodegas and be like, "Yo, I want to rent your shop. I'm going to I'm going to defer you $3,000. I like your face. So I'm going to give you 2,500. It was ridiculous, you know? And then like at the end, you start to go like, whoa, you know, there's like, you know, there were a lot of people involved. A lot of people had to get paid, but it's still insane that we made a movie for $900,000. And with the soundtrack we had, you couldn't even put that soundtrack together right now for under a couple million.
No,
So,
that happened to me too. And you got, I mean, if John Pearson gave you the seal of approval, that was a big deal back then.
It was. It was at that time because I read about John and like, you know, you're going back to pre-digital stuff, which is just crazy to say out loud, you know what I mean? But you're going back to like Premiere magazine, you know? So you're like, oh, John Pearson, I read about him in Premiere. He had a whole, like, you know, they had a whole profile on that guy. So I knew who he was. His pedigree was pretty amazing. High art guy, you know, art house, started Spike Lee, which he's got to have it. In a sense, when I say started, they started together, and I think he helped fund Spike a little bit. Spike really did it on his own and autonomously. And then,
I mean, that was She's Gotta Have It's one of the first movies of this new indie wave, and that came out in 86. So
well, they would do it. We were like considered like do it like, and I think like they had written a Vogue article that I was in, and Annie Leibovitz shot a group of us, and it was like me and Carl Franklin and Stacey Cochran and Todd Haynes and Robert Rodriguez, Greg Araki. It was a great Allison Anders. It was like an insane like crew of people that we all shot together one day. And I think they just referenced it by calling us like do-it-yourself filmmakers, right? We weren't waiting to try to like get into a system. We were just like creating calling cards for ourselves.
Sure.
So, and that's what Spike did. Like all those guys, Richard Linklater with Slacker, you know, Michael Moore, Roger and Me, which Pearson did. So yeah, I mean, I'm really grateful. Without John Pearson, the reality is I don't even know what becomes of Rob Weiss in this lifetime. And you know, like in a weird way, I think I also, and I mean, I can't fully take credit for this, but I do believe in my personal family. I was the first person to do this. So I think I created an illusion, at least at the very least, that this can be done. So a lot of my family's in the business. Everybody kind of moved west. So I think it really shifted. I mean, obviously shifted my future, but I think it also impacted the lives of the people closest to me. So, and I really have to be grateful to John for that. I mean, to be honest with you, I didn't really have the greatest relationship with the guy following that, but you know, so I don't want to be too kind, but you know, I really am grateful for the positive aspects.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, I've always looked at independent filmmaking as an inherently positive act because to set out on that path, you have to have a dream and you have to have the belief that you can achieve it. And you said yourself just now that you were 22 years old. You wanted to catch up to friends of yours that went to college. What did you have inside you? That made you do this? And you didn't just do it, you finished. You made that film. You went to Sundance.
I think I always just, I had desire, like just to not be where I was. You know what I mean? I can't think of a better way to say it, because like, it wasn't like I was like, oh, I have to be somebody. Although I would say there was a part of me that wanted to like be someone and wanted a bigger life, and like felt like I would look at people who were like, and again, this is going back to me at like 19, 20 and the way I saw the world. I saw people in the quote unquote limelight or spotlight. And there was this kind of, you know, like question, you know what I mean? Like, what do these people really have something that I don't have, right? So, but that's, and as you get older, you realize that really nobody has anything. You know what I mean? You have a little bit of God-given talent and what you do with it, but the rest is all perception and created, and it becomes a mythology or whatever. But, and I think that was kind of sparked inside of me by my mom. So my mom was always, as a child, actor, dancer, but it was a different time, right? So to get away from your parents, to get out of your house, you get married. So my mother had me at like 22, if not 21, 22. Then my brother Mike, then my brother Andy, like 8 years after me. But she was, you know, she was a mom and a housewife in Long Island. She didn't work, but she studied a lot of theaters. She would go into New York, go to HB, Strasbourg, always go to a lot of plays. And she would do background work and do theater and do stuff like that. And like always try to get a break or get a line in this. And it was interesting because I was always kind of like, wow, is it really that tough? So I think a part of me wanted to prove it could be done, you know, to myself, to her. And the other part of me was just curious to see if I could make something. But also, I was just a creative kid, and I just never knew what my outlet would be, right?
Sure.
So I could always write a little bit in school. I was always kind of funny, had a wise ass. Um, in fact, like a bunch of years ago, I found my Woodmere Academy high school yearbook, and it was like 10 years hence, Rob Weiss will be the next Don Rickles. And in the last will and testament, they left me an audience, right? So that's me at 17. So I think that part of me to create for an audience, you know, whether it was clothes, because for a while I thought I was going to be Ralph Lauren, right? Like I went to Parsons, I was like, I'm going to design shit. And then I get there and they're like, nah, man, we're making evening wear for women. And you're like, oh, I thought I was going to get to make cool suits for me and my friends. You know what I mean? So it was like, it was a different thing. But I think it's a convergence of a lot of different elements that push our lives onto a path. Some good, some bad, but you know.
What were some of, like, casting, obviously, putting together a crew? Like, where did you find all the people that you ended up working with on the movie? Did you already know a cinematographer, for instance, and then obviously the
No, we didn't really know anybody. So we like I had a friend that I grew up with who was my partner in the endeavor in the beginning. And when it looked like we weren't really going to get it going, he split to go back to LA because it was pilot season and he wanted to be an actor. So he bailed. And he was going to be one of the leads in the movie. So I'm grateful he split because he would have fucking sank the whole thing anyway. You know, I mean, that guy couldn't act out of fucking get out of a bag, you know? So, you know, not to be nasty, but whatever. So the two of us had actually met Mira Savino at the Goodfellas premiere, a premiere that we snuck into in New York, you know, and we became friendly with her, and we had talked about trying to do some other stuff, like making a club for young aspiring filmmakers, and her dad was supportive of that. And when I wrote Amongst Friends, I sent it to her, and I was like, would you help us with this, with the casting and putting it together? So she came on board. Ultimately, she would be the female lead in the movie. I think I had a hard time at first seeing her as an actress because I knew her in a different way.
Right, sure.
And then I think my mom just looked at me one day and was like, what are you, crazy? She'd be amazing, you know? And then we were like, oh, let's do it. So, but she was really instrumental in helping us cast, but, you know, it was non-union. So everything was through backstage.
Right, sure.
It's headshot submissions. Like you're getting headshots and you're like, oh, this guy looks fucking dangerous, or this guy looks cool. This girl looks like she's like a Long Island girl, you know, because it was very specific to a time and place,
Sure.
right? So then, you know, we went about the same course with crewing up. The two producers who had the most impact alongside me were just two young college graduates, one from Yale, who lied and said he had produced dozens of music videos and he'd never produced anything. And the other one who applied to be a PA who went to Wharton School of Business. And I was like, hell no, man. You're a producer, bro. You're a producer. So when we shot like the week or so's worth of footage, you know, heavily stacked to some cool visual shit and cool character stuff, for them to go and try to hit, you know, the ground running in terms of fundraising, they went down to, I believe it was like the AFM, American Film Market in New York. and they were handing out flyers like, "Hey, come see us. It's Goodfellas meets Metropolitan." And they're the ones who actually put it in
I
Pearson's
love it.
hands.
Scorsese meets Whit Stillman.
Yeah, it was. I don't even
That's
remember who came
that's
up with that.
fantastic.
Because I always saw amongst friends exactly what it was. Like, you know, for me, it was 90210 had just started, was like a year in. And I always felt like I lived in the area that felt like East Coast 90210, but with gangsters. More gangsters, more crime, more violence. It was 90210, but dangerous, right? So it was like, it was Goodfellas light in a way meets that, you know what I mean? So it was the interesting thing about having gone through the process was a movie like that really doesn't perform necessarily because it's not really an art house movie. It's an independently made film, but it's not high art. It's commercial. It's a little commercial, you know, in terms of thematics, commercial movie. Yet you've cultivated it and are curating it to be this indie experience, but it doesn't play that audience. So, you know,
I know exactly what you mean.
yeah.
I went through the exact same experience. As a matter of fact, when I went with my own film, Free Enterprise, through the indie film circuit, we were actually looked down upon when other indie filmmakers saw our movie. They're like,
Right.
"You clearly have made some commercial Hollywood thing." And we're like, "Wait a minute, man! It was made independently. We were a scrappy, low budget."
It's such a bad thing to have more people like your work. I would rather have numbers than have some kind of you know, make something that's self-indulgent that's just for me. Like, I don't need to spend other people's money to make work that satisfies me.
I
But
completely agree.
I do need to feel good about what I'm going to work and doing and feel good about the people that I am doing that with and the process that collectively we have, you know, embarked on in order to deliver something for an audience to enjoy. I don't want to make, I could theoretically make an indie movie for $1 million every year for the rest of my life, at least until I make a bunch of bad ones that are fucking worthless. But I could be doing that right now, and I just feel like I don't see them getting out there. Most of them are so diluted across the platforms. There's just so much content, but I want to focus on things that I feel like can really hit an audience, you know?
You and I are absolutely simpatico in this realm because independent movies, unless they have a commercial hook of some kind, no one is going to see them. They're going to, and there's a lot of great work being made. But now let me ask you this, you know, so you truly, the indie can-do spirit got amongst friends made, but you found yourself at Sundance. What was that like? How, you know, was that a John Pearson thing?
No, well, I mean, I think that's what really, you know, gave me the first shot at a career, right? I mean, that shot, you know, that first career will have been squandered and, you know, left in rubble by time I'm like 30 or 31. At least that's the way I saw it and felt at the time. But yeah, I mean, again, you know, John was really the Sherpa. Like, he wasn't just the financier. My problems with John, you know, in the process, I think I had a couple issues with him in editing where, like, the guys are robbing a nightclub and you cut to two guys, like, smoking, like, angel dust outside or something. And he's like, "You're not going to be able to know where you are." And I go, "Well, the guys are going to run out and be with them in a second." Like, it was like specific filmmaking notes that I disagreed with. And then we just had like some argument at Sundance. But back to your question, was, of course, everything was John, you know, in the sense that outside the actual construction of the movie, John is the one who sent it to be reviewed for Sundance. We dropped off a print. I snuck into the theater behind, like, I forgot even who it was. I know it was like Jeff Gilmore, and it was I'm gonna forget who the woman was. She was awesome, man. It was not Stacey Grimm. What the hell's her name? She was I don't know. It'll come back to me. But she's amazing. I remember me and a couple friends like snuck into the theater and crawled behind their seats, and I heard one of them say it was like a Jewish Reservoir Dogs or something like that. It was just hysterical. So we were like, "Oh shit, this is big. This is big." And then yeah, when we got accepted, it was just, I mean, at that time, you're talking about, it is the beginning of Sundance, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is holy shit. Like, we got in Sundance. We actually were invited to Cannes later that year, but I think it was too close to the release, or they didn't want to put it in Fortnite because it had been in Sundance. There was something there that, but I would have loved to have gone with that movie. Obviously, if I make a movie again this lifetime, I hope to go there. You know, there are certain places you want to go to, but with the right kind of experience going there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've only been to Sundance 3 times. You know, I went to Sundance in competition. I went to Sundance to shoot an Entourage episode at Sundance. And then I went because I was a part of some event when we were on, I think, the Writers Guild strike. There was some event during Sundance that I was kind of like helping out with a little bit, and I'm like, oh, let me go over there. But you want to go do those things for, you know, in the right way, right? So, but yeah, Sundance was tremendous back in the day. It was, and I mean, I'm sure it still is. I'm sure a lot of people are really, you know, they make their deals. You know, you know, obviously, I mean, it was 30 some odd years ago, all things considered, like the sale of Amongst Friends, it didn't go to the right company.
I know how that is too.
You know what I mean? Like, fine line. I don't want to be a fine line. And I mean, this is going to sound weird to say, but I actually got a call. I was living in my girlfriend's, at the time, her apartment. She was a USC student. I was only like, I think 25, 26. And I was like staying on an air mattress with her. I got home from Sundance and I got a call that Jeffrey Katzenberg was on the line. So I'm like, holy shit. You know, I'm like, hi, Mr. Katzenberg. And he's like, Rob, call me Jeff. And it's crazy because that Jeff Katzenberg is probably 15 years younger than the Rob Weiss that's talking to you right now.
Right.
But at the time I was like, holy shit, he's such a, you know what I mean? What a towering, like, you know, figure who's, you know, been in this business so long, but he was still a kid at the time,
Yeah.
you know? So, yeah, you know, we talked and he had seen Amongst Friends and he really liked it. And he told me that he was getting Bob and Harvey Weinstein, or Harvey and Bob Weinstein, to screen it, and that they need to buy this. And I think this is probably pre-Disney Miramax deal.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is.
Right. So, but I think they're kind of all, you know, they're all like very close at that time,
Yep.
right? That was, they're in bed together. I don't know what the, you know, what the nature of their business is, but he was saying that he wanted them to buy it. All things considered, that would have been a game changer, I think, for the position of the movie. But the reality is, like, whatever. The movie was a low budget movie. It was a cool little movie. I haven't seen it in like 25 years, but every once in a while people talk shit to me about it, like how good, you know, I love this or I love that or whatever it is. But
well, now let me ask you this, because I kind of felt the same way. So I did that whole thing. I made a movie festival circuit, and you kind of think, oh, I've made it. You know, I made a movie. I'm a filmmaker now. And then, of course, you start going to meetings and more meetings and more meetings. And you talk to people, and nobody can really greenlight your project. You talk to mid-level creative executives. What was it like after you'd made Amongst Friends? And how long did it take you to throw up your arms and say, enough of this?
No, I mean, look, man, I had the complete opposite experience. I have to keep it real with you.
Yeah, please.
I could have made anything. I got offered everything.
Wow.
I could have made any movie I wanted to make. I was a mess. Like, I had gone from being the lifelong underachiever to a meteoric overachiever. if I had 99 positive reviews and one negative one, I believe the one negative one, I walked myself out of a game. Nobody was around to tell me that it was okay to fail, which is the single greatest lesson that I hope to impart on my 6-year-old son is you give it your best, you fail, you pick up the pieces, you move on. That's how life works. I had such an acute fear of being humiliated and failing that I just didn't pull the trigger. So
Wow.
I would
Okay.
say,
Wow.
and again, but hold on, but during my term deal at Universal, I had written a movie that Savoy bought called Milk Bar. See, my neuroses came in it was pretty bifurcated. If I wrote it, I felt like I could go direct it. If I didn't write it, I was freaked out by it. So they offered me Good Will Hunting. I was like, I don't know what the fuck this is. But I wrote Milk Bar. I'm like, I could shoot the shit out of this. But the studio fell apart. So now 2 years had turned into 4. So now I'm 30 years old, right? People are like, oh, he hasn't made a movie. And I'm like, yeah, but the guys I fucking idolize, the Michael Manns of the world, they make a movie like every 5 years, you know?
Right,
like,
sure.
you all on me for it. But it was like expectations were higher on me. So I think like after Milk Bar fell apart with this company, Savoy, and we couldn't get it out, and there was all this crazy shit, I was like, I'm going to go write this Jimi Hendrix movie for, I think it was HBO at the time. And I'm going to work on this Iceberg Slim adaptation. And I did both of those as writers. By the time I came out of those, 6 years had passed. Now I'm persona non grata. But also from 28 to 32, I've been in therapy and I've been working on myself, you know. And people would be like, oh, I thought you had a drug problem. I'm like, I've never done a fucking drug in my life, you know. So none of it had anything to do with anything. But those 4 years, 5 years of therapy got me to a place where I'm like, I'm ready to pull the trigger. Let's go. And by the time you're ready to pull the trigger, people are like, fuck you.
Wow.
Right?
Okay.
Like, we don't give a shit anymore. So now I'm dead in business till roughly 35 for 3 or 4 years of struggle. Sell a show here, get a script to write there. Somebody pays you independently to do this. And then that's when Entourage happens, right?
Well, before we get to that, I gotta ask you, and I find this, I was a huge actually still am a huge Bret Easton Ellis fan. I had read Less Than Zero in college. I spent a whole weekend. I think I read the book like 4 times in a weekend. Then, of course, Rules of Attraction and Glamorama, and then American Psycho comes out. And when I mean, that was such a notorious when it came out. It was like, oh my God. And how did you got involved in American Psycho?
So I had met Bret in New York before I ever made Amongst Friends. You know, he was one of these kind of like young iconic figures that was a throwback in Manhattan.
Like Jay McInerney, that whole literary brat pack that came out of Bennington College and all that.
Big City, Tamajanowicz, in New York, and you'd fucking see Jim Jarmusch walking around.
Donna Tartt later on.
Yeah, it was just like there was a culture, right? So you would go to places, and you know, I'd see Bret, and we had met a couple times. So we you know, like I can't remember the extent of it, but he was also super friendly with the guy that was going to be my partner in Amongst Friends, right? So he was kind of around. So anyway, I was in a design class. I've told the story a million times, but whatever. You're getting a lot of rerun shit, but I'm refining these stories.
It's okay.
You know, because the more I tell
I've never heard them before.
But I was in a design class, like a draping class at Parsons, and I was reading Less Than Zero. And a classmate of mine, a girl, came over to me and said, my dad's producing that as a movie. And I said, and her dad, I think, was Marvin Worth. And I'm pretty sure that's who it was. I can't really remember, but I'm pretty positive. And I was like, oh, shit, I want to be involved in this. And she's like, if you want to make movies, why are you in a design class? And it was like, ding. Like, so when they bumped me out of design, because I was like fucking sitting there sewing shit to my pants and I really didn't have what it took to make like evening wear, you know. It was like, I went and started studying film. So in a weird way, Less Than Zero for me was this incredible inspiration. I'll still watch the movie like at least once a year, if not
Well,
more.
it's a great looking film. It just doesn't bear any resemblance
It's
to the
amazing.
novel
I
it's
tried
based
to
on.
get right, but no, it was. I mean, they're both like independently of one another. They're both pretty substantial pieces of work
Oh, absolutely. Look,
to be viewed by a young person, right?
I
Like
wish they'd
maybe
made a
not.
whole spin-off of James Spader's character Rip
Yeah, it
and
was
make the
hysterical, man.
LA
Yeah.
drug dealing. It would have been great.
Yeah, with the other dude, with his like security cat, the badass. I used to see that guy hitting the bag at Mickey Rourke's gym. He was a tough dude. So, what was I gonna say? So, Less Than Zero, right? So Less Than Zero had a lot of impact for me. Even on Amongst Friends, we tried to hire the composer to do my movie because the composition for the movie of Less Than Zero is incredible. The book was incredible.
The score for
Anyway,
Less Than Zero, the film's incredible.
Big Bret Easton Ellis fan. Then I'm at Universal with this like big deal. I also had a deal at TriStar. I had like a lot of hype, right? Like back then, it's magazines. Like I'm in every magazine. I'm out like across social media. There is none, right? So
magazines
I have
are
a lot of attention, and I hear that I read American Psycho. I'm like, this is sick. This is sick. And I find out that Ed Pressman has the rights, right? So it's Ed Pressman is leading this like consortium of like 3 or 4 different producers and financiers. So I get a meeting to go to Ed Pressman, talk about directing it. And I went over with the person I hired to be my assistant, who I actually just said was a development person, even though it was glorified assistant, but she was also really sharp. We went over to Ed Pressman's together, and I sat with Ed, and I can't remember who else was in the meeting, but there were a couple of people, and then I sat with Ed and told him what I loved about the book and that I want to do. And Ed was a tremendous guy. Like, you know, I mean, he's still a tremendous guy, but I'm saying when I first met him, again, incredible resume. I would just, my whole thing is like, part of the insecurity I had was that, like, I was a fan of all these fucking people.
Right.
I was just so in awe of the people that I was getting to go sit with.
Yep.
That
right there with you.
But I didn't want to let that on, so I tried to act so fucking cool that it alienated everybody. Like, I would just be sitting there with like, I went and sat with like Katzenberg, Ricardo Mestris, Danny Halstead. I had some whole meeting with Disney, and I was just sitting there like, yeah, all right, yeah. Meanwhile, I'm like, holy fuck, I can't believe I'm in the room with these guys. So it was bananas. But anyway, so I go sit with Ed, talk about the movie. He didn't seem super responsive, but he seemed cool. But when I left the meeting, Lisa Caruso was like, that is the worst meeting. And she had been like an assistant for somebody at CAA. She's like, that's the worst meeting I've ever seen in Hollywood. She's like, that was a disaster. What a disaster. And then like 10 minutes later, I get a phone call probably from John Lesher, who's my agent. I'm like, yo, they want you to do it. I'm like, dope, I'm in, right? So I got attached as director. I spent a lot of time with that crew, everybody from Ed to Alessandro Camone to the Solomon, Christian Solomon who's a producer, to my friends, Chris and Roberta Hanley, that I'm actually working on a project with now. And they've done like 50 movies. You know, it was a big collection of people. And I tried to figure out what the script looked like, but it was so you know, like, not esoteric is the right way of saying it. It was surreal, right?
Yeah.
So because it's surreality and it's alternate reality in a way, and I'm such a logic freak, it was hard for me to let go and just go into this realm of making this kind of piece that is somewhat distorted, anachronistic, you know, all these different kind of, you know, elements that aren't really my go-to in terms of storytelling. So I was struggling. And in the meantime, I was writing this movie that I referenced before, Milk Bar, for a friend of mine who was a director. And I'm like, yo, I got a little free time while I try to figure out what the fucking book is. I'll write this movie and you could go direct that and I'll produce it. And he's like, great. But when I finished writing it, I realized it was an extension of Amongst Friends. It was the next chapter and I should really go do that movie. And I was like, bro, I really want to go direct this movie. You'll be my co-writer. You'll be the producer and I'll move to director. he was like, cool. I went to Ed and I'm like, look, like Universal, Columbia, like all these different, maybe Sony, all these different places wanted the new script I wrote. Ultimately, I sold it to Savoy. I had a great relationship with Rob Freed, who ran the place. You know, I ultimately sold it to them, but it was like, it was in play and I knew I could get it going. So I went to Ed and I was like, look, Ed, let me go shoot this movie. Hold American Psycho for me. I'll bring you on Milk Bar as a producer, even though all the studios are like, yo, that guy gets like $1.5 million to just put his name on a fucking movie.
Yeah.
Like, do you really need him? And I'm like, yeah, I need him. So Ed came on that as a producer. But then at some point, Ed was like, look, man, we're going to lose our option. We're having option issues or financial issues. How about we move you to EP of American Psycho? You shoot your movie. I think he took a dramatic pay cut on my movie. And that's what happened, except my movie wound up falling apart. American Psycho wound up going forward. And then I got bumped down to co-producer because they needed to go get more money or something.
Right,
I don't know.
Sure.
From there, it's like, whatever, who cares? But I always crack up and people go, yo, oh my God, I love that you did American Psycho. I'm like, that is the one project that I had the least amount of input on.
Of course.
It's the one project that I contributed the very least to.
Well, then, I mean, you did have an incredible success with what was one of the big pop culture sort of zeitgeist things of the mid-aughts, which was Entourage, HBO's Entourage. Right. And how did that come about? And was that something, did you know what a cause celeb kind of a show it would be? And also, not only was it a pop culture zeitgeist moment, it was prophetic in that you anticipated the making of an Aquaman movie. Maybe James Cameron didn't direct it, but Entourage and its vision of Hollywood became, I mean, I lived in Hollywood. I you know, and life imitating art. I think half the people I used to meet out on a Friday night thought they were in Entourage and that it was real.
Right.
What was it like? How did you get involved in Entourage, and tell me about your relationship with Doug Ellin?
So I went to high school with Doug, same Greg Vance, Marilyn's son. They were the same year, a year younger than me. Doug was only there for a year at this private school. Then he went back to the high school in his town. But we had known each other from then. So even when I was making Amongst Friends, Doug would pop by. He had a strong interest in film at that time and entertainment, mostly comedy. I think he was probably Wayne if he wanted to be a stand-up or do that. And but he would come through casting and maybe edits. And when I had my Universal deal and I had a bungalow on the lot, he was at AFI. Like he would use my bungalow to do like cast some of the short stuff like that. So we had always had like a friendship, but not like a best friendship. Like we're not like insanely close guys, but we're always been cool with each other. You know what I mean? Like we're friends. So you know, even when he was writing it, and when he wanted to get out of his house where, you know, he had his son, his wife, and he needed some space, or he wanted me to read something, he'd come up to my house and I would look at, like, you know, and hear about Entourage. And I don't think I really had much to contribute. I can't remember contributing, but I remember having those convos. I went and visited them on set when they were shooting the pilot. And when the show got picked up, he's like, look, I got to hire writers. And I was really the only guy he wanted, you know? So for me, though, I had come off a weird experience doing this little show, Punked,
right,
which really started out as not a career opportunity, but started out as just like a guy I knew who was friends with my brothers, also friendly with me. We were friends with his wife. Had said, yo, I heard you like the show and you have good ideas. Why don't you come and write? You could do it from home. Send in ideas and we'll pay you. I was like, all right. And somehow that morphed into this experience where I felt like a 9-to-5er, which was not an experience that I was used to. But I also felt like I wasn't in the most kind of it didn't feel like a non-toxic environment or something. I don't know, man. I'm not a snowflake. Like I'm not sensitive, but like I'm trying to figure out how much of it's me and how much of it was the experience, but it just wasn't a good experience. It could have all been me. It could have been my ego. It could have been my crazy head. I have no fucking idea. I don't care. I did not like it. Like I worked there for a short period of time. I didn't like working with those guys. I didn't want to fucking do it. Whatever. It all became what it became. But the takeaway from that is, whoa, that is a very different experience than what I thought it was going to be, because I knew this guy socially. I thought it would be cool, and it was not fucking cool. I no longer want to work with people I know socially, right? So when Doug called me, I had this bad taste in my mouth, and I was just kind of like, yeah, maybe I'm going to come in. I'm going to watch the pilot. You know, sounds good. But I was like, I don't want to go to fucking work for these guys and just be harassed. And like, I'd rather just fucking starve. You know, I didn't have a kid then. I didn't have any responsibilities, you know, and it just didn't feel like the right thing. My girlfriend at the time was really upset. She thought it was a great opportunity. They went back and forth with Doug a couple times where I'm like, yeah, I'm going to come in. I never went in. He's like calling mutual friends. Like, what the fuck is wrong with this guy? Why doesn't he come in? And then like, I finally called my agent time, Leslie Maskin, who was like, she didn't know anything about what was going on. She was like, look, you want to get back to directing? This is the way to do it. You know, go to work on an HBO show. You're going to be able to do what you want to do afterwards. And I think after my conversation with her, I called Doug back. I went in. I was like, yo, I'm in. I went in, saw it, sat with him and Levinson, Steve Levinson, then Larry Charles. And then the task became getting me cleared by HBO, who really only knew of Amongst Friends and thought, you know, oh, it's a street film. It's gangster. It had a lot of humor and a lot of levity in the right places, I think, but not enough that they saw me for a comedy. So it really took a little bit of push, and you know, it worked out, and it changed my life, you know. And again, grateful to all involved who helped elevate me and bring me into that fold, you know.
And you were there for the duration of the series from 2004 all the way to...
Yeah, I was always involved. I didn't write after season 5, I don't believe. Like 6, 7, and 8, I didn't script anything, but like I would help with story and make my contributions. I feel like at that point it was up and running, and I had also developed how to make it in America. So I was doing double duty around there. And I think at that point, Doug and Ali Musica were taking more, you know, more control, and like they were handling they were handling all tasks. I don't know how to say it. Say that they were doing day to day implies that like they were working for me, which wasn't the case, obviously.
But you were able to parlay that, obviously. Were you surprised at how big?
So I actually thought Entourage was gonna be just the death of me, because I was embarrassed by it. Like I'm not gonna lie. Like season 1, I'm like, nobody's gonna watch this. Nobody's gonna like this. What the fuck is this shit? This shit is horrible. Like I was like, we're going down in flames. I had absolutely no clear, you know, no clear perception of the way, you know, way it was being received. It wasn't until I was out in town and people that I had known when I was successful started talking to me again that I went like, oh, the show's doing something. It was like, I was like, these motherfuckers been ignoring me for like 4 years, man. Now they're like, hey, what's up? I'm like, yo, I'm like, all right. People are liking the show. You get used to all of it.
Of course.
Here. It's so funny, man. It's just, you know, it's just the system. But obviously grateful that, you know, you, like I said earlier, you want to make things that people respond to. And people definitely responded to that. And shockingly, like, I haven't seen it. Like, I haven't watched Amongst Friends in almost 30 years. I haven't watched Entourage since the episodes aired.
Wow. I
watched one recently, like a year ago, with a friend who wanted to ask me a question about an episode, so we put it on. But I hadn't, like, watched any of it. And it's amazing to me that during the pandemic, a whole new kind of audience found the show.
Yeah.
Like, young people, you know what I mean? So...
Well, because it's the life everybody wants to lead, I think, you know,
right?
It still is, especially if you live in Hollywood.
Yeah, a lot of people have moved out to LA because they watched that show young.
Yeah, Absolutely.
And then I'm always like, don't blame me, man. Blame Doug Ellin, man. He sold you this shit. Nah, I don't say that.
Well, then you got How to Make It in America off the ground. What was the story with that?
Well, that was already like a project that had been in play at HBO, but couldn't get traction. So I got involved. Steve Levinson got involved first, then he got me involved, and we kind of shifted some stuff, reconceptualized, repitched it to them, and then rescripted and just got it moving forward and cast it the right way. And there was like, it's debatable on why it didn't have like a long run. I was really only involved season 1. I didn't do season 2. I mean, I was an exec producer, but I was more passive.
Sure, absolutely.
So I think, a lot of voices, a lot of different points of view. It was like too many chefs, man.
Well, but
no 5-star, and none of them 5-star fucking chefs. You know what I mean? A room full of fucking 2-star chefs, me included. So
Well, then you were able to parlay again with HBO. You made Ballers. You're executive producer of Ballers,
so
and with Dwayne Johnson, the biggest movie star in the world. Just opened with a $140 million.
Yeah, that's really Levinson though. So I was writing at the time. I was working on a biopic about Sonny Barger, who just recently passed away, who was the kind of like patriarch of the Hells Angels motorcycle club. And I was really excited about working on that. I think since the time I was going to Parsons, I had been reading books about the Hells Angels, and I was fascinated by the culture, particularly the Hells Angels, more than other motorcycle clubs. And I always wanted to do that movie, even after Amongst Friends. And I had been having conversations with Oliver Stone about finding projects. I had this idea, like, what if I write the ultimate motorcycle club movie for like Sean Penn and Gary Oldman, and I get Oliver Stone to direct. And a friend of mine, Chuck Zito, who was one of the presidents he was the president of Nomad chapter, and we had just met. I was like, hey man, I want to do a Hells Angel movie. He's like, it'll never fucking happen. It's never gonna happen. He said it in a good way, but he was like, it'll never happen. That it's actually a trademarked club, and you can't use the mark, and every charter around the world would have to vote on this, and it's never going to happen. So I'm like, all right, I get it. Then Sonny's book came out, and Scott Free, Tony and Ridley had gotten the rights to the book, and I think I was trying to get myself in the mix to adapt it, but that wasn't happening. So all this crazy shit happened with that, but that's a show for you to do with somebody, with Ridley.
Sure.
But all this crazy stuff had happened with it. And then years later, I got a call, like after Entourage and How to Make It, from a friend of mine, Pete Antico, is a stunt guy who had a relationship with Sonny and his wife Z. And he was like, they want to talk to you about doing the movie. You interested? And I was like, fuck yes, but I want to direct it. I want to write it. And we wound up doing that for Fox 2000. And I had done a draft with Jeff Santo, who's a great writer. He came through Sonny. They had made an indie movie together. And Sonny just said, hey, if you do this, we want you to write it with him. And I actually love Jeff. His dad is Hall of Fame baseball player Ron Santo. He's an amazing story, an amazing person. So we were working on that. And at the time, Steve Levinson said, hey, man, I want you to read this script. A young writer wrote it. And he brought me like a hard copy to the and he swears that I said after I read it, yeah, this guy writes like a young me. But I don't remember ever saying that. But I didn't much I didn't know at the time that Steve actually wrote this, but he wanted to get a fair read out of somebody. And that was the pilot for Ballers. So he had actually created Ballers over a couple years of just grinding on it. He and Wahlberg had attached Dwayne, because Mark, had done, I guess, Pain and Game with him, and they had a relationship. And then, in order to really jam it through at HBO, at least the pilot, they wanted Pete Berg to direct it, right? So all that stuff has nothing to do with me. That's all Lev and Mark and their monster fucking business acumen and the way they get shit done. Lev says to me, he's like, look, we're going to go shoot the pilot in a couple of months, but we're going to do a little room. Myself, I did at the time, after my one season of How to Make It in America, I vowed to never run a TV show in my entire life. I'm like, fuck this shit. Now it's different. At the time, though, I was like, hell no. But he knew I didn't want to show run. He's like, and he found Evan Riley. And I wasn't a sports guy anyway, and Evan was. Not that it was even an issue, but he had a showrunner, Evan Riley. Evan had a guy, Steve, that was his good friend, and they worked together a lot. And he goes, we're going to do a room for 4 weeks, or maybe it was 8 weeks, 10 weeks, I don't remember. But he was like, I'm going to get you paid if you want to come in for a couple hours a day for this period. Just talk about what season 1 would look like of this show, so that after we shoot the pilot, I could tell HBO this is what the season is, or Evan could tell HBO is what the season is. And I was like, all right, hell yeah. It was like a good amount of money for me. I was like, fuck yeah, I'll go do that. So we started doing it, and like we figured out what season 1 is of this show in like 3 weeks, and you're like, oh, all right. And then they go off, they make the pilot, and the show gets picked up. So then HBO says to me, look, you could just grab this consulting producer credit for season 1, and you got the money you got, or we'd love to have you as an exec producer and pay you your fees. And then you start to go like, oh, this is how they get you, man. This is how you get sucked right back into the machine. I was like, this is awesome. So I was like, hell yeah, I'll do it. It was a small crew of people, but in a weird way, I think it was the project that I had the least affinity for, or the least personal connection to on the onset, and maybe the least responsibility out of the 3 that I had done, turned out to be the most important one for me creatively, because Evan left in season 3. It was Lev's show, Lev running the show, me next to him. The last 2-3 seasons of that show, we basically wrote the whole thing. I was directing the show and exec producing. It felt like a complete experience for me, right? When you're writing it, directing it, you're putting your 2 cents in as a producer alongside other great producers. It felt like the involvement level was so high that there was a real sense of fulfillment from it that I hadn't had in other experiences. And I was also just like, there were days where I'd be like walking in to like a huddle of like Dwayne Johnson, Russell Brand, and Rob Corddry. And I'm like, I felt the difference is I felt okay. So all those anxieties from the years before, it felt totally natural for me. There was no anxiety. I felt like, yo, is where I belong. But I'd be like, yo, look at these guys. These guys are fucking amazing. Like, they were just like, like, I could think of so many scenes like that. Like, Troy and fuck, who was it, man, from West Wing that I love, man. He's genius. Who the hell is it? I forget his name, man.
Richard Schiff.
I'm looking at Troy Garrity, Richard Schiff, Steven Weber running scenes. You know what I mean? John David Washington. Just like the whole crew, man. Just incredible talent on that show. It was just that was a great one. So anyway, yeah, I stayed in and did it, and now, and then that took us into the pandemic,
Right. Well, listen.
That ended the summer before the pandemic.
I mean, this has been. I love this story that you've told us. It's a great journey. But as we wrap up this hour, I have to ask you. You seem pretty positive for people that are getting into the business now, and we all know it's a terrible business and it's a wonderful business, sometimes both at the same time.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to people in our world where TikTokers are getting hired by studios?
it's got to be a piece of the pie of your life. Like, it's such a different day than when I got into it. First off, like, the allure to be involved in the entertainment business in the early 90s is unbelievable, right? You feel like you're just getting pulled into, you know, American royalty, the sexiest business. It's creative. It's a different day now. Like, it just doesn't exist that way. And my son, who's 6, I already told you about him. He's like, you know, he's such a good little artist, man. Like, the way he draws and the way he looks at things. He'll take my phone to take a picture and he puts it on. Like, yeah, I put it on portrait mode and then I went really high in the contrast and I blew everything out. And you go, this kid's 6 years old, man. There's a level of intuition they have that we didn't have, whether it's digitally or, you know, just analog. They've just, the mind and the consciousness in some way has evolved. But I say to him, because he'll be like, maybe I'll be an artist someday. And I'm like, absolutely. You could always be an artist someday. But you should get a job at Goldman Sachs. You know what I mean? And you should paint every weekend and every night. Because you can't, it's just, I don't know, man. For me, again, it's going to be a different story depending on who you ask. But for me, I have a lot of energy. I would like to do a lot of things with my life. And I think that when I got into this business, if I said, oh, I am a director, but I'm also a chef, which I'm not, by the way, but I'm just using that as an example.
Sure.
Or, you know, I'm in the cannabis business and I sell crypto. They would be like, oh, you're not a director. You're not really a writer-director. If you're a writer-director, you don't own restaurants. Like, that's the way it felt in the early 90s. Then all of a sudden, you're like, wait, but Robert De Niro's opening all these restaurants, and he's a famous actor. There was no fucking branding, you know what I mean? They weren't be like, oh, he's branded, you know what I mean? It was like, it was so different. So they fucked us. They just did. Guys like you and me, Robert, we should be way substantially wealthier than we are.
It's true. I couldn't agree with you more, Rob.
I'm only joking, but it is a different day. So I would tell everybody, and even like young filmmakers, man, go across all platforms. Create your TikToks, create your viral videos, make your sketches, make your skits, write, you know, act, do everything, man, you know, do everything.
Rob, could you have a social media presence? Can people find you on social media?
Yeah, it's just my name, @Rob Weiss. So, you know.
Well, I have to tell you, I'm so pleased to have spoken with you today because what a kick in the pants you've been, and a very different designing Hollywood than we are used to hearing from the great costume designers we talked to. But this was a great. Well,
you know, I did the show before.
Yeah, I know.
Well, I love Marilyn, so we should say that. And I'm not saying I need a reason to show up and do this with you, but Marilyn's a close friend of mine. And, you know, it was, like I told you, one of the first support systems upon my entrance into Hollywood, right? And one of the few people I trusted. So I'd done the show before, but it was an entirely different format. So when they reached out again, I'm like, I don't understand. Like, what didn't I say last time?
Well, I was just excited to speak with you as well. So this was really, you know,
she's a great combo.
She made me the go-to host of the show. And I'm like, it's funny because meeting her, I'm like, I'm not worthy of you. And her and Martika, and I'm such a Marilyn Vance fan. It's been such an honor for me to do this for the last year. And talking with you and Doug has been so much fun. But
no, I appreciate it. This felt like a good convo. I feel a lot better about myself after this convo. I feel like I cathartically dumped a lot of shit on you. And
that was fantastic. Are you kidding? You've actually helped me too. I feel better about myself after the conversation you and I had.
I did do it right. It wasn't me. It's them. It was them.
It's right. Yeah. God damn it. It is them. Yeah. But no, I mean, like you said, I think it's really important. The world has changed, but there's no reason. The more you expand, whether you're doing TikTok, I mean, we used to think that there was only that movies were the end all be all of everything.
Of course.
And now it's not true. You got TikTokers being hired by studios to come make content. So if you want to be a content creator, you can't limit yourself to wanting to make a 2-hour movie. I mean, you got to get a streaming deal.
No, you got to do everything. You got to try to hit it everywhere. And make your mark wherever you can make it. You know, it's a money game, man. It's a money game, you know, and like you got to play it. You got to play it on that level, and you got to be smart with it, man. And you got to capitalize when you do some shit. You got to keep it moving. there's a lot of hacks, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
A lot of tricks to fucking being able to do it, you know. But for me, you know, I'm just like, just keep grinding on like the projects I have and see what we can get to move forward and see what pops off, you know. It's like you never get to a place in your career where you actually believe you're going to continue to work.
Rob Weiss, this has been a tremendous conversation. I want to thank you for your time and for coming on the Designing Hollywood podcast. Clearly, this has been one of my favorite conversations, and thank you so much for doing it.
Thanks for having me, Robert. Guys, Marilyn, Martika.
Well, that was a great conversation. A very special thanks to our guest, Rob Weiss, for telling us everything we wanted to know. Thanks a lot, Rob. And a special thanks to our sponsor, Paris Costumes. Paris Costumes has been a part of the history of the European theater, film, and television industry since 1856 and has become 21st century tailors. A special thank you to founder and executive producer Martika Ibarra, co-founder, costume designer, the legendary Marilyn Vance, and of course, John Campea from The John Campea Show. Thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Tune in to the audio version wherever you listen to podcasts. I am, of course, your host, Robert Meyer Burnett, and you can find me on Instagram at rmburnett, or find me on Twitter at BurnettRM, or on YouTube at PostGeekSingularity. Thanks very much. Like, subscribe, and give us your comments. What would you like to see on the channel? Right down below. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode of Designing Hollywood.